What if the very thing you do when your partner hurts you is actually making everything worse and you don't even realize it?
Welcome to another episode of Master Your Marriage. And if you're new here, welcome. We appreciate you for being here. We drop a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe to the show and you'll get notified when a new episode drops. And if you find value from today's episode, would you kindly consider leaving us a 5-star review and a comment?
So, over the past several weeks, we've been exploring these losing strategies that couples often fall into as they grapple with the realization that their relationship isn't giving them everything that they want. The truth is that relationships have a way of highlighting our immaturities and the areas where we are still psychologically underdeveloped.
Oh, yeah.
And most of us engage in self-deception, meaning that we avoid looking into these immaturities and these limitations. So our goal with this series is to help you recognize these patterns so that you can create something better, a choice-based marriage that you really cherish and find joy in. And we've already covered the first 3 losing strategies. So far, we've talked about the need to be right. We've talked about controlling your partner. And we also talked about unbridled self-expression.
That was a good one.
And today we're moving on to the 4th losing strategy often found in relationships. And it's called retaliation or punishment.
Oh, man, I don't even know how many times I've been guilty of that.
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, retaliation is this. If I don't get what I want from you, I'm going to make you pay for it. And I'll punish you and find some other way of inflicting some pain or some suffering or some emotional distress on you. That is retaliation.
Yeah. And retaliation, as you can probably imagine, is very ego-driven.
Oh, yeah.
Ego, of course, again, is that collection of stories that we have about ourselves. So it's very ego-driven. You've probably heard the old adage, that old saying, don't get mad, get even.
Oh,
Right.
Or an eye for an eye.
This is very common human behavior. Generally, we resort, many of us do, to some form of retaliation after those 3 losing strategies that we mentioned a moment ago. The first 3 losing strategies have failed. And it might sound something like this in your own head. Well, if you won't admit that I'm obviously right and you won't let me control you and you don't care about my feelings, then take that. I am just going to get even. That's what retaliation is all about.
So funny, and not funny actually when it happens. Revenge is so ingrained in our human nature, but it's worth exploring why we engage in this in our relationship and why it's such a difficult strategy to resist. It's also important to look inward and ask ourselves how it is that we're retaliating against our partner. We're going to share some ways and some ideas later. But the reality is that we've all done this at one point or another in our relationships.
In some form or another. Now, if you think you've never engaged in retaliation, you might be fooling yourself because retaliation can take many forms, both large and small. The big offenses are usually obvious, but the smaller, more subtle acts of retaliation can go unnoticed even by or especially by ourselves.
Yeah, we usually just hide from it. Retaliation is trying to cause the same emotion in the other person that you're feeling in yourself right now. So, for example, if you feel like your partner has disrespected you, maybe you'll just ignore them on purpose, or you're going to give them the silent treatment, or maybe you're going to start interrupting them intentionally. You could get sarcastic, you could roll your eyes, you could become dismissive, and all these are just strategies in your way to disrespect them back for this disrespect that you felt.
Exactly. So it's you feel disrespected, so what can I do to make you feel disrespected?
Absolutely.
And this is very common. Most of the time, we don't even know that we're even doing it. It's almost unconscious. We just feel some sort of big, uncomfortable, negative emotion. And then we want the other person to also feel that big, ugly, negative emotion in much the same way. So we create a situation where they do. On some level, we do this because we want them to understand how they have hurt us and ultimately become accountable for that. But it's not a very good way of making them become accountable.
Yeah, we want them to understand how they've hurt us, so we don't tell them, we just hurt them.
So that now you know how much I've hurt, and now you're going to apologize for hurting me. Probably
Yeah.
not going to work.
Yeah, that doesn't work well.
So Terry Real calls this a perverse form of communication, which is a twisted attempt to actually repair. We're trying to force them to get it by making them feel our pain. But ironically, of course, this strategy is always going to fail.
Yeah, I mean, when you say it out loud, it doesn't sound like it's a great
But isn't
strategy.
that true with most things? When you say it out loud, you realize, oh, that's pretty dumb.
Yeah, that's sort of one of my favorite sayings. People say something I'm like, say that again out loud, just so that you can just get a feel for how that's landing.
Right.
All right. Let's break down retaliation to get a clear picture. So there are two primary forms of retaliation. Charlotte talked a little bit about them earlier. The first is direct, or also known as overt. This is explicit hostility or harm with the open desire to cause pain and or suffering. This can be in the form of physical or verbal aggression. It is usually saying, demeaning, devaluing, or critical things to each other.
For example, let's do a couple examples. You might say to your partner, oh, you think I'm mean, huh? Well, you know what people say about you behind your back? Everyone thinks you're the mean one. In
Totally.
fact, the only reason why you have any friends at all is because they're just hanging around you for your money.
That's mean. All right. Another example, maybe you're leaving for vacation and you feel like your partner didn't help you enough around the house, didn't get everything packed and cleaned. So the whole way to the airport, you criticize their driving and yell at them about all the things that they've done wrong, usually past history.
And at the core, there's a desire, again, to cause harm, to cause pain. Then you have the indirect or covert retaliation. And this is the more subtle, sneaky way to retaliate.
Yeah, I was going to say sneaky.
Sneaky, although it's definitely not subtle for the person on the other end of it who's experiencing it. For that person, it's just as painful. So indirect revenge is also called passive aggression.
Oh, we've heard that before.
Passive aggressive. And it manifests through things like withholding of approval, withholding affection, withholding love, withholding respect or attention. And it might be refusing to say, I'm just not going to tell you I love you. I'm not going to give you that hug that I know that you desperately want. I'm not going to sit by you on the couch. I'm not going to snuggle you. So this is where retaliation can be subtle and I think very deniable even to ourselves. And so we really have to be honest when we take that look in the mirror because that is still aggression. And sometimes we don't even want to admit to ourselves.
So, I mean, I'll just give you a perfect example of that from yesterday. I don't think you know about this. Charlotte and I had just come back from a trip and there was just a little bit that was, I mean, when we're tired and, you know, we have a little bit of things going on in the family right now. And Charlotte, I could tell, was just a little bit standoffish. And we hadn't had a chance to talk about it yet. And so I had come in and I could feel sort of this energy that was between us and it wasn't perfect. And I know that one of our rituals, and you've heard us talk about this, is how we greet. And so I came home and I was going to kiss her on the back of the neck. And I'm like, she doesn't really want me to deal with her right now. And I knew that we were going to get around to processing whatever it was. And I almost didn't kiss her on the back of the neck. Right? It was really close. And then I thought to myself, like, how would that make me feel? You know, is there something I could do that might just soften the situation? So I did. I kissed her, told her I love her. And then I went out and we're getting ready for a couple of things at the house. And so the point is that I almost just, because I'm the victim, I felt like she was pushing me away a little bit. And I didn't understand it. So I almost retaliated in that way by withholding something
Exactly.
that she needs and she really, really loves it. So
That's
there
a
it is.
perfect example.
There's my confession.
Such a perfect example to go with this because it is something that could have gone unnoticed. Like you knew that you were going to maybe avoid showing that affection that I'm used to, but you chose, wait a minute, you had that second consciousness. I actually want to still be someone I respect and I want to act in integrity with who I am, which means I can't just go retaliate.
Yeah.
When I feel a little bit hurt.
Yeah. And that was tough.
Yeah.
But so anyway, there you go.
Great example.
Didn't know that I had that. You know what? Marriage is full of examples.
Give us a couple more.
All right. So let's say, imagine your partner asks you, did you enjoy making love last night? And you respond with a dismissive, like, yeah, it was fine. Long pause.
Or
That'd be terrible.
Right? How would that feel?
Oof.
But maybe you do say things like that every once in a while that, just have a little sharp edge to them because you want them to feel hurt. You
Yeah.
want them to feel bad.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
maybe or maybe your partner didn't help you to put the kids to bed last night, or they didn't help you to clean up the kitchen. And so you refuse to go to bed with them. You just sleep on the couch, or you refuse to give them some sort of affection, like Robert just said.
And we've talked about Dr. Terry Real on this show a lot. He's the therapist who's come up with these losing strategies. And he likes to say, in direct retaliation, you say or do something that is nasty. In indirect retaliation, you don't say or you don't do something that you probably should.
Mm,
And the first is mean, and the second is mean spirited.
mm.
And luckily, I avoided the second yesterday.
Good job.
Yeah.
So I had this client I was working with. This was last year, and not a current client that I'm working with, but she came to me after she and her husband had a really big fight, and which reasonably so. She was extremely hurt and disappointed and disillusioned from that fight. And so of course it was natural for her to feel all of those things, to feel hurt. But in her response, she became extremely passive aggressive. And interestingly, low, she really didn't see it. But her response was for many months, maybe even a year, she withheld all verbal and physical signs of love and affection, not sleeping in the same bed, not going to hug you, not going to smile at you, not going to be affectionate in any way. And this went on for a really long time. And that's about the point where they came to see me. And I asked her, "So are you punishing him?" And she said, "No, no, I wouldn't do that. I don't think I do that at all." And it wasn't until we started kind of pushing on these losing strategies
Yeah.
and pushing on that muscle to grow and to look in the mirror that, she started to see, actually, yeah, yeah, I actually am. Because she had felt hurt, she had wanted to hurt him. And maybe that was more unconscious, but it was there. And once she was finally able to see it, she started to realize how her behavior didn't align with who she wanted to be. And again, her best self, being in integrity with who she wanted to be. So we all can be really good at deceiving ourselves.
Yeah. The most common type of retaliation is what we call offending from the victim position, which was this example that Charla
Mhm.
shared. It's the justification that you harmed me first, you offended me first, therefore I have the right to do whatever it is I'm doing. In this mindset, you think to yourself, if you hit me, I get to hit you back twice as hard with no shame or blame, because after all, I'm the victim. You hurt me first.
Mhm.
And when you offend from the victim position, you end up in the really absurd situation of being the perpetrator who feels victimized in this case, even as you become the offender yourself.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's that. Yeah. Think
That's
about that.
think about that.
Yeah. Think about that.
Sometimes I'll ask couples in coaching, is there anything you think you might have done to create trouble or to contribute to the problems in the marriage? And oftentimes, what a lot of people say at first, because usually, like our first 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, is just going through these losing strategies and confronting our side of the street. And at the beginning, people will often say, "Well, I guess maybe a little. There's a few things I might have done, I suppose." But really, no, it's actually more him. It's all him. I might have done this little bad thing, but that's only because he did that other thing first.
They deserved it.
So he deserved it. And
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I'm a little cruel. Maybe I'm a little harsh, but he's such a jerk. So, I mean, come on. Of course I can do these things.
That might be the phrase that you should use to wake yourself up about whether or not using this losing strategy. They deserved it,
Yeah.
because what they deserve is your absolute best self. They don't
Mhm.
deserve anything
And
less.
you deserve your best self.
Yeah,
We all
without a doubt.
deserve our best self. So this is just all of this "you deserve it" stuff. This is just a way of justifying our own immaturity, our own psychological immaturity, by pointing the finger outside of ourselves and onto the shoulders of someone else. And ironically, the other person is probably basically saying the same thing. So here's the truth about retaliation. Almost all perpetrators of retaliation see themselves as victims.
Ooh, say that again.
Almost all perpetrators of retaliation the ones who are doing it, actually see themselves first as victims.
Ooh. Now, we don't discuss domestic abuse or violence on this podcast. That is beyond the scope we have here on the show. If you are experiencing domestic violence, we strongly encourage you to seek help immediately. But as an extreme example of retaliation, it's interesting to note that the research on abusive men shows that even in domestic violence, the perpetrator usually feels victimized. In their minds, their partner betrayed them first, such as she looked at another man or she didn't give me the respect I deserved. And therefore, they feel justified, not correctly justified, but they feel justified in inflicting the suffering.
Mm.
But two wrongs don't make a right. And there's a clear distinction between protecting yourself from abuse and retaliating with cruelty. It's one thing to say, I'm not going to tolerate this cruel behavior, and quite another to be cruel in return.
Good point. And here's something to really consider. Offending from the victim position actually accounts for more than 90% of the world's violence. Think about that. Even just think about what's happening in the world right now. Think about that 90% of the world's violence stems from feeling justified in committing some form of retaliation or revenge against another person or another group of people. It's probably even likely higher than that. So in our homes, whether it's the silent treatment or an unkind word between two people or this violence between countries or ethnic groups, violence at all levels is fueled by the righteous anger of the victim.
I like that you used the word righteous there because there's a lot of this religious undertones that have happened when it comes to wars
Mhm,
and violence between different peoples and countries,
mhm.
since
Forever.
90% of it is that.
Yeah.
So the first step in committing to a nonviolent life is confronting our own propensity for revenge. We all have it. No matter how justified we might feel, and no matter how large or small the retaliation might be. We have to be honest with ourselves about the sneaky and covert ways we're trying to get revenge and understand that we need to stop it.
Yeah. We may not individually be able to make much of a difference across the wars in the world, across the civil strifes that happen in our communities, but we can commit right now to resisting the temptation of retaliation. It is very tempting, very compelling, but we can resist it and bring more peace into our own homes, even if we can't make that big of an impact on the world stage.
Yeah, I think that as long as we start at home, we can then expand that to our communities. So if each of us can just start bringing more peace and less revenge into our homes,
Mhm.
that's a place to start. And here's something we teach in our home. We taught our kids this. Just because someone has hurt you, hurt your feelings, or whatever, doesn't give you the right to strike back. And how often we forget to apply this advice in our own lives and relationships. The urge to fight back is so immediate and visceral that it can be hard to control. Most of us manage to contain our impulses when it comes to physical retaliation, but
Mhm.
far too often we give ourselves permission to lash out verbally through any one of the strategies: humiliation, ridicule, or being critical. All these are aspects of verbal abuse and really have no place in a healthy, thriving relationship. I like
Exactly.
thriving relationship.
So you can make a commitment to take retaliation, both physical and verbal, direct and indirect, off the table in your relationship. But to be able to do that, we have to be willing to drop the ego. Our ego wants to hold on to being right. Our ego wants to be in control. Our ego wants to get what we think we deserve. And so it tells us all the time, you're justified in doing whichever losing strategy you're using in that moment. And this is especially true when we are getting flooded or we go into fight or flight. Our ego is the enemy to loving each other well. It really is the enemy to connection and the enemy to intimacy.
I love that. Ego is the enemy to intimacy.
Mm,
It really is.
yeah.
I like that. The good news is we don't have to stay stuck in these losing strategies. Dr. Terry Real teaches us something he calls the second consciousness. Okay. So follow with me here. The first consciousness is this automatic reactive part of us, this immature ego driven part that gets triggered and reaches for retaliation as its primary tool. It's the part of us that feels hurt and immediately wants to make our partner feel the same pain so that they'll understand, as funny as that sounds.
But it's true.
But it's true. The second consciousness is our mature, wise adult self. It's the calm, loving, clear thinking part of us that can show up even when we're upset.
That's
It's
right.
hard to access it though.
The second consciousness is incredibly powerful because it lets us do something that the first consciousness can't. It allows us to stay in connection with our partner while also being honest about what our feelings are and what our needs are in that moment. And usually at the end of the day, like when we're grabbing for a retaliation, we're feeling a negative emotion, and that negative emotion is being driven by a need that isn't being met.
Yeah.
So our second consciousness is able to be honest about what that need is without hurting the other person. We don't have to choose between closeness and standing up for ourselves. We can have both. This is exactly what creates deep intimacy and choice-based marriages that most of us really long for.
So how do we find
Mhm.
and engage this second consciousness in the middle of one of these difficult moments?
Good question.
It starts with a simple pause. When you feel that strong urge to punish or retaliate, just stop,
Mhm.
take a few breaths, and recognize that you're in this reactive first consciousness. Then ask yourself, how would the more mature, loving part of me show up and respond right now?
Yeah. And from that place that Robert just described, you can speak vulnerably about your needs, about your heart, about how you're feeling. And you can also make a clear and respectful request for what it is you're needing in that moment without having to resort to attacking, withdrawing, retaliation, or any of these losing strategies that we've talked about. This shift from first consciousness to second consciousness is one of the most important skills that we can all learn and implement into each of our own relationships. Yes.
So if you've been on this show for a while, you'll know that we have some journaling questions for you to reflect on this week.
Let's do it.
Always going to need a little homework. All right. So here are the questions. And if you're driving, rewind this later when you get home. If you're home, take a second, open up the notes app or write this down. Here's your questions. Number one, when was the last time I withheld affection or approval from someone that I love? Okay. Number two, how did I feel after I did that? Number three, what was I trying to get by punishing the other person?
Good question.
And four, how'd that work out? Did I really get what I wanted? And if so, what was the cost?
Ooh, I really like question number 3. That's my favorite. What was I trying to get by punishing the other person? Because if you'll really slow that down, you'll realize you had an unmet need. And
Ah,
that's tragic because if you could have expressed the need instead, you might have got it. But more than likely, you didn't get it because you resorted to retaliation.
yeah, I think the reason I like number three as well, because if we're honest with ourselves when it comes to retaliation, what was I hoping I would get? I was hoping that they would feel the same pain that I had.
That,
I don't know that you win
that
with
doesn't
that one.
taste very good coming
Yeah.
out of my mouth.
Doesn't sound like a win. I
No,
mean,
it doesn't.
if causing pain was your only goal, then congrats. But you didn't. Nothing else happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are some really great introspective questions that require some thought and a lot of self-honesty. So get out your journal, see where these questions lead you. And I think that's all for today.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't yet, because next week we'll be sharing the next destructive pattern that commonly plagues relationships. Thank you so much for being here today, and we are so grateful for each of you. We kindly ask that if you have not yet, please comment, leave a 5-star review. It really helps us make a greater impact and help more couples. And if you know someone who this episode might help, please consider sharing it.
And of course, as always, be kind to each other this week. Take care of each other. Remember, it's the small things done often that make the biggest impact.
Until next time.